Let's get into discussing Trauma 101. A trauma is any deeply distressing experience that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. We either don't have the skills or we don't have the capacity to digest the emotions that are brought up for us. We can think of trauma as being analogous to consuming an apple. A normal experience for me would be like picking up an apple, biting into it, I chew it up and I swallow it. Once the apple arrives in my stomach, I'm able to digest my experience, glean different insights from it. Ultimately, I'm the wiser from that experience. In the case of trauma, our apple is very different. It might be the apple going directly from my hand straight into my belly. It still has the potential to provide nutrients, but it's now lodged in my stomach, whole and dense, very difficult to break down, and ultimately no good use to me in its whole form. Now, that doesn't mean that the apple needs to stay in its solid state. We'll get into how we can break that trauma apple down in a little bit. But the important thing to know about trauma is that it's individual. An episode that is traumatic for one may not be as traumatic for another. Moreover, traumas are not simply the huge ones that we're going to be discussing the qualities of today. We also have small t traumas, which can be difficult things that are relatively common for us in our experience. If we've gone through many breakups, we might be used to the feeling of loss or of grief or of having to let someone go, but a breakup can still be very traumatic for us. Since you are taking this class, you're probably familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress. PTSD is a physiological disorder that changes the brain in response to any intense emotional event. And there are several factors that can make us more susceptible to the experience of trauma and to the way that it changes our brains. The first factor is age. The very young and the very old are at a greater risk for trauma. They are more susceptible, often because they either lack the ability to communicate their experience or the ability to advocate on their own behalves. Also, if we were to revisit our neurology module, our capacity for coping in early childhood is heavily dependent on our mother or our primary caregiver's presence and their ability to handle and deal with complex emotions. The second factor for trauma is the severity of the threat. The third is degree of physical harm that may be inflicted. Fourth is a possibility for escape. Fifth are our coping skills. And finally, sixth, the final factor for trauma susceptibility is the cumulative effects of previous traumas. After many traumas, as they compound, I start to experience a wear. My coping skills can become exhausted. Furthermore, my patience and my psychological capital can begin to deteriorate. This is really important when we consider certain demographics of people and the types of traumas and the types of life challenges that they face. So here's a question to ponder. Drop your comments in the chat so we can discuss. So, why don't we just eventually bounce back from trauma? Take a moment to think and let us know what your thoughts are in the comments section.